Hello, this is John Smallwood, Certified Financial Planner from Smallwood Wealth Management on your Wealth Curve discussion podcast. And today I have a very special guest that I think everybody's really going to benefit from the conversation. And I have with me Leslie Tayne, attorney. She runs a debt solutions law firm. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. She has written a really awesome book entitled Life in Debt, a fresh approach to achieving financial wellness. One of the things that when you look at Leslie and you look at her background, she, not only is she in the super lawyers and she runs her own firm, she's been in debt. And her story, I think, is really interesting because I think when you think about debt, we all have this concept of good debt versus bad debt. And I had when you read her books, the first chapter, it really hits this concept called good debt and bad debt. And the way you and I think about good debt and bad debt is very similar, but yet different. And I wanted to, before we jump into, detail about debt, structuring debt, what concerns and what areas, I kind of want Leslie to share her personal story because if I tell it, it's not the same as you telling it. So go ahead.
So my personal story dates back quite a long time ago at this point, where I went to law school and I incurred a lot of debt going to law school. Undergraduate was paid for by my parents. I went to a state school here in New York. And I was fortunate enough to have my parents cover the cost for that. So I wanted to be a lawyer from early on. So there was never a discussion about money, how it was going to be paid for, what the obligations were going to be. I got into law school and wanted to stay local to where I was going to practice. I chose a law school. There wasn't like there were discussions about scholarships or monies or anything like that, which is kind of interesting because today the world of going to graduate programs and undergraduate programs is filled with discussions about opportunities to get money to pay for school aside from loans in terms of scholarships. In my time when I went to law school, that wasn't an opportunity for me, and I went. And how was it going to be paid for? I went to an office, the financial aid office. I said, I have to pay for this. They said, I remember signing the documents. It's like clear as day, as if it was this morning. It was a form document. It had perforated sides like the old printers had, where it would go through the printer. And I signed, I'm aging myself, and I signed the document. I didn't even read it. I didn't know anything about it. I just signed it. Circumstances changed a little bit in law school. I needed money to live off of. I wasn't working or earning any money. So I went back to financial aid office and said, I think I need more money. They said, okay, how much do you need? I said, I think I need X amount of dollars. Okay. And then I got it. And all of a sudden one day I signed for it and it was in my bank account. I used it for living expenses, but I graduated from law school. And like many graduates from law school, I didn't have a job offer right after law school. The job offers that I was encountering were very low, almost, in numbers that I could not even imagine working for. But I did get a position, and I was married right after law school. And then by the time I passed the bar, I had a child, and or I was pregnant at the time I was admitted to the bar. And at that point in time, I was being supported. My husband had a job and it was being supported. So I really didn't think about any of these things. I didn't really understand. What I knew was that they were calling me about paying back and they were asking me for numbers that were astronomical. And there was no way for me to pay that. I mean, they were asking for numbers that were like I remember $1,000 a month. And I remember saying to the person who called me, if I could afford $1,000 a month, I could drive a Mercedes. But I can barely pay for my dry cleaning, to clean my clothes, to go to work or to go on interviews. So there's no way I can pay that. So lo and behold, that when there was nothing I could do, the money wasn't there. I didn't handle the bills in the house at the time. My husband did. He was a little older than I was and a little more established, so he took care of the bills. And the notices would come and I would just ignore them. like anybody else who's in debt, and this is where I can relate to people in debt, it's so stressful when those letters come, and it's stressful when the calls come. You just want to ignore it. And so I did, and I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't have the ability to pay, so what was the difference? And I ended up getting sued by one of them. As time went on, I started working, and I started to ask questions about the impact of it. I remember that I had, I knew what credit was a little bit, but not enough to really be, to really understand the verbiage or the implications of not paying the debt and what that meant. And so as time went on, I started to ask questions to my now ex-husband, and he really couldn't answer them or explain, why the bills weren't being paid, or the deferment or forbearance process. And a long story short, I started to negotiate with my private student loan carrier, and I negotiated a settlement with them, and I paid them out of money that was given to me from a family member. I had a tax implication that most people don't know about. When you settle a debt, there could be a tax implication. You receive something called the 1099-C forgiveness of debt. That form needs to be included with your tax return. Sometimes there's an implication, sometimes not. In my case, there was. So I then owed the IRS some money. And then I had my government loans to focus on. Those are not and were not at the time negotiable. I started paying them. As my career developed, I earned more money. I was in a better position to comfortably make the payment. Even though I comfortably made it, I didn't necessarily want to make it, but I did. The payment was $923.31, and I still will always remember those numbers, and I swear that one day I'm going to play the lottery with those numbers, because it must be my lucky numbers. I just put it on auto pay. I got a discount for the auto pay, which is still true today. In many cases, you can get a discount if you auto pay your loans. I forgot about it. I went about my business. I had 3 little kids. I was divorced. I had a business I was growing, and I just forgot about it. It was in every month. I just write it down in my checkbook, and it would come out. One day, I had my head down, super focused on building my business. My accountant said to me, Leslie, you have enough money in the bank to pay off your student loan. I was like, what? What are you talking about? He said, no, you can. You could just pay it off. I said, okay, then I will. If that's your recommendation, and okay. And I wrote a check for $98,000 and change to pay off my student loans. And, I guess a lot of people would say, why you didn't know you had that much money in the bank? I'll tell you the truth is that when you're building a business and when you are super focused on family and business, I wasn't counting the dollars in the bank. I was counting, how hard I needed to work, what I needed to do to support my family and to build my business. I wasn't focusing on the cash in the bank, so to speak. I knew that money was, obviously, I knew there was money there, but was I really looking at it in a way that said, okay, what do I do with the money? Should I pay my student loans? It wasn't a thought in my head, but I did. And it was the most liberating, wonderful, amazing experience of my life to write that check. The check is ingrained in my head, and I still remember it. My credit was terribly damaged during the years that I didn't pay my student loans. I couldn't qualify for anything. And I remember being in stores and they would say, would you like to apply for a Bloomingdale's credit card? I'd be like, no, you're never going to give it to me. And that was, obviously I was in my 20s. Even though I graduated from law school and I did well and I'm a bright woman, the language about credit, debt, management of my loans was so foreign to me. And I could tell you from my clients who are very bright, who are lawyers and doctors and in the financial world, that a lot of the language and the lingo that's in the student loans is very difficult to understand. And if you're not used to talking about it on a day-to-day basis, or it's not part of your everyday life, it's confusing. So I'm not blaming anybody about my experience. In fact, it's just a story. I just had no knowledge of it. There were no services available at the time. I probably wouldn't have even sought out any service. I wanted to go to law school, and that was it. So, and I never thought about really the costs ahead of time. I never even heard of that word, truthfully, until I became a debt expert. So, and budget is such a dirty word today. I mean, you talk.
Oh, it's like diet. It's like diet.
It is. It is. It's awful. And I say budget like, and I want to duck because I think someone's going to throw something at me. You know, when I talk to people about budgeting, they're like, yeah, I do that, but it never really works out. And, you know, budgeting requires a regular working of your money. And I had no money. I was in law school.
Right.
I just graduated from high school.
And you're self-employed.
Yes, I'm self-employed now. At the time, I was not self-employed. When I graduated from law school, I was employed by other people and corporations, and then I left that and went out on my own, and that's where I built my business, and that was about 20 years ago now. But I am self-employed at this point in time.
So this experience of being in debt, not realizing what you were signing, even though you were going to law school, not reading the contract, not understanding how ruthless that they're going to be with you to get their payment back, how you can't get out of it, really sheds a lot of light on what you do. And I think, what I'm seeing, I hit a point in my career where the families I've been working with for 15 and 20 years, the kids are going to college, right? And they're going down to, and they're signing up for these student loans and they don't really know what they're signing up for. They don't know it's going to cost them $923.11 a month, and that's going to be 42% of what their net pay, coming home is, right?
So probably more like 57%.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's this, the student loan debacle or crisis is tremendous right now. The amount of student loans that are out there and how easy it is to get these loans, and the schools are just making the expenses so much higher, and I think it's allowed the school cost to jack up so high. What do you see out there? Like, if somebody has student loans and they're having trouble paying, what are their options? What can they do?
So there's a lot loaded in everything that you mentioned, and it's really important to know that, and just stepping back for 1 second, because this is the common thought process. I was going to law school. I didn't care what the document said. It's non-negotiable. Right. So you want to go to college and you want to go to graduate school, those loan documents are non-negotiable. If you don't have the money to pay for school and you're unwilling to go to alternative schools, meaning local schools, or work through school and go part-time, you have no choice but to take out the loans if you're not fortunate enough to have family pay for your schooling. And even then you may need some loans. Those loan documents, private and public loan documents, are non-negotiable, which means that you don't have any options. And that's why when people take these loans, they don't think about it because they're looking for a means to an end. I wanted to go to law school, so it didn't matter what it cost. Other people want to go to the University of Miami and NYU, and they don't care what it costs because they want to be where they want to be and do what they want to do, and that's the end of it. There's not a lot of thought process in, does this make financial sense for me to do this? Yes, school is very expensive, but there are other options. And the student loan crisis, where the monies are available and therefore it makes it easier for the schools to jack up the cost, that's true, but that's a supply and demand issue. There's plenty of demand to go to these schools. If you look at the schools, they get 50,000 or more applications for 2,000 or 3,000 spots, and that's publicly and internationally and nationally. So there's a supply and demand piece of the puzzle here. So it's not just the schools, it's not the loan companies, it's not the government, it's the demand for people to want to go and do it no matter what. You could leave the country and go to school for a lot less. You could go to a community college for 2 years. It costs very little money. And you could go to a state program in your state. Most people I know, and I have 5 children in college. I have 3 of my own and 2 of my stepchildren. They did not want to consider, they wanted to go where they wanted to go, and they were not willing to consider other options. And they're not unique in that matter. Kids today at 15, 16, 17 who are looking at schools do not have the brain capacity to make financial decisions about how that's going to impact their future. And frankly, like I didn't, they don't care. because all it's about is the experience that they're going to have at a particular location and how happy they're going to be having this experience. That is not the thought process when you're a business person making a financial decision. So the cost of college coupled with the user, the end user, and the supply and demand piece of the puzzle is where most of the problems come in. So the question is, once you take the loan, what happens when you can't pay it? Well,
right.
And that is a very good question. So we're past the point, like with me, I was past the point of, oops, I shouldn't have done this. I wasn't earning a lot of money and I didn't have a lot of options. So the end result was default. And that's the case with many of the loans. In private loans, you have very little options versus public loans. In the public government-backed loans, you have options for forbearance or deferment, which means you don't have to pay and they push it off over a period of time. And you also have options like an income-sensitive or income-based repayment, meaning they'll look at your income and they'll make a determination of the affordability of what you could pay. And those are wonderful options, except that you're still accumulating interest, and therefore the loan grows. All loans have interest on them, public and private loans, basically, unless it's subsidized. But let's assume, because most people have unsubsidized, that they're all interest-based. So in an interest-based loan, it's still accumulating. So if you're going to make a $100 a month payment and your balance is $100,000, you're not even close to hitting interest. That becomes
right. So that thing is negatively amortizing, just compounding and growing.
100%. Yeah, there's an amortization schedule. And if you ask anybody, even a homeowner, what an amortization schedule is, they don't know. That's a schedule that basically shows you what the cost of the loan is over the course of the 30 years to pay it back, because those loans are designed for 30-year paybacks. Private loans are a little bit different. You don't really get those options. So they go immediately into default when you can't pay what's demanded of you. And then you can end up in litigation. So, and again, we can go into the good and the bad and the ugly or the pretty about litigation on loans. But be that as it may, a lot of people are very stressed about what to do with those loans and the debts and how those loans then impact them as an employee, as an employer, as a borrower, and what it does to their life going forward and how it impacts their credit. So there's a lot of misinformation that's out there about student loans and debt. And certainly in the debt world, there's tons of misinformation. The biggest misinformation in the debt world related to student loans is about the student loan forgiveness program. It's out there and it sounds wonderful and it's a terrific term. Oh, I can get my loans forgiven. But there's only about 1% of people who've applied that actually had their loans forgiven. And many people go through that process and realize for whatever reason that they didn't qualify. And there's a lot of agencies out there and individuals who claim that they can help people apply and stay on track with the forgiveness program. But they too, if you ask them, have never personally seen people get those loans forgiven. And there's actually a lawsuit now. A group of teachers are suing in a class action the federal government for not having their loans forgiven. And it'll be interesting how that turns out.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, but so the student loan forgiveness program, I hear people say to me, well, I'll just work in the public sector for 10 years. Great, but that doesn't mean that your loans qualify for that. And that doesn't mean over those 10 years that if you get married and then all of a sudden you file jointly with your spouse, that your loans still qualify. There are so many ways to fall off the bandwagon. It's like being on the bumpiest ride in an open, carriage, and you really at any point in time can fall off. So if your adjusted gross income goes above a certain level, your loans no longer could qualify for that debt forgiveness working in a nonprofit. Yes, that could be the case. It could happen that your loans will no longer qualify in certain circumstances. It's not just not-for-profit, it's government-based public service. So it doesn't have to be necessarily not-for-profit, but it could be, some sort of, and most of them would be because they're government, but it doesn't have to be. It's just some sort of public area. But again, you need to find out if your loans qualify, and then you have to recertify those loans every single year. So you can't miss that. You have to send them your income and all the information and your tax returns and that doesn't always happen with everybody. It's a lot to stay on top of. So with
Oh
that
my God.
said, that's one of the biggest misinformation areas. And some people are of the mindset that they'll just wait until the government changes the policies, but I am not a fan of that at all. I mean, I've heard that from a number of people who said that. It's no different than the mortgage crisis, because the mortgage crisis were government-backed loans, and the federal and the student loans are all government-backed, or mostly government-backed. So if you were to forgive a large portion of federally backed loans, what's going to happen? They're going to have to tax the taxpayers in order to make up for the shortfall in the monies that the government was getting from those loans. So if you think that the government is really going to forgive a large portion of loans and say, okay, debtors, you owe us $1 billion, and all right, we'll take out 500 million of it, and you don't have to pay us back. Who's going to pick up the slack for the money that the government lent? Us, the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not. It sounds great as a campaign promise, but in reality, it's not a financially fiscal decision for the government to forgive student loans.
No, I mean, no, that doesn't make any sense. Now, in your book, you define good debt and bad debt, and the way you defined it is any debt is good debt as long as it doesn't get uncontrollable or unmanageable. Because debt allows you to buy a house or a nice car. As you said earlier, for $923.11, you could have had a really nice Mercedes.
That could have.
Right?
Okay.
Exactly. So there's good debt and there's bad debt, right? And I think there's this, in the financial planning space, there's this mindset that debt is bad and I need to get rid of debt as quickly and humanly possibly, as humanly possible, as humanly fast as possible. I can't even say that. But debt is a tool, the way I look at that, and you want to use the tool to optimize the tax benefits that might be associated with the debt. Commercial loans or primary residence, student loans could actually have some deductibility up to $2,500 a year in interest, depending upon your adjusted gross income. But it's a tool to allow you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. And I think paying off debt or accelerating debt, not necessarily the greatest thing, because what I find is that people lose their liquidity. And that's where you see some of the biggest foreclosures that I've seen, is people that all their equities in a place, the bank won't lend them any money, and they have problems, liquidity problems.
So you bring up a really good point. You're right. There's so much, everybody wrote a book about how to get out of debt. I wrote a different book about how to learn to love and live with your debt, because I believe debt is part of life, and it's a good thing. And it is a tool that you can use to create opportunities for yourself and live really well. So I'm not of the mindset, even though I'm a debt resolution attorney and I've been doing this a really long time, and this is all that I do is help people resolve debt, I am not of the mindset at all that one should be out of debt completely. Debt has to be manageable. And the question is, for you as an individual, how does debt work for you and not work for you? And I always get my brother and my in-laws, cousins, did this and did that to get rid of their debt. No. It's all about you. It's all about your financial circumstances, your short and long-term goals, and and it also has to include a management tool for that. And that management tool has to come from you. It doesn't need to be sophisticated. It just needs to be something that helps you be aware of the debt you have. All debt starts off as good. Otherwise you wouldn't have it. So no one would give you a car if you weren't going to pay it, or a house if you were going to default on the payments. So all debt.
Law school debt, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Going to school and college is great debt to have. First of all, in fact, you can use it to your advantage. So I have counseled people who have plenty of money to pay for college. I have counseled them to take federal loans in their children's names and start paying those loans while the kids are in school to help build the credit of those kids while they're in school. So you could use debt to your advantage and it could work for you. It's a matter of the perspective that you're taking on the debt. If you're using debt to live off of and you can't pay it back, that's the problem. That's
an interesting thing, because credit score becomes this really important thing today. Without a good credit score, you really can't do much.
You can do things, you're just going to pay more for it.
Correct.
That's the
exactly.
It's a little bit of a marketing tool. You got to have a good credit score. If you don't have a good credit score, you're really not a good person. you can have, I have clients with great credit scores, but they don't have a penny in the bank, and they can't borrow. No one will give them money. So you could sit with your 780 credit score and be, kind of not have any money in the bank, and no one's going to lend to you. Or you can be in the low 600s, and there's a lot of lenders who want to lend to you. You're just not going to pay the best interest rates. So the score in a bubble is what the consumer sees, but it's the totality of that score related to your debt, your income, and your management of your money and your debt that puts you in a position to optimize opportunities financially.
Right. And I think people lack like a fundamental understanding of structure, right? I can remember years ago when I started in the business, I would do direct mail pieces, and, I'd get to go to somebody's big house and, out in a big town close to here, and you pull up and it's a big mansion, and I come in to talk to the people, and you walk in and there's hardwood floors, and it's a very hollow sound, right? There's no drapes. There's no furniture. There's little Tykes furniture up in the front, and they got this mortgage that was like almost 40% of what their income was. And the theory was they're going to grow into, but that 40% prevented them from basically having any money to do anything else with.
And that's an old thought process. The growing into a mortgage is now, it's dead. That's dead. That was back in, right, that's dead. You don't grow into
the early 90s. I'm dating myself.
Right. Well, it's true though. You don't grow into mortgages anymore. You have to buy what you can afford to buy, because your expenses are going to exceed your income, your increase in income, unless of course you're in certain fields. But as a general rule, that is not the case.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things that I like to see people do is, when you look at the income, even though the bank might lend you 35, 36% for principal, interest, and taxes, you really want to be in the 25% range, because I find that is optimal.
Correct. I mean, they say 30%, but it's dangerous at 30%. So if your taxes go up or your expenses go up, and that also depends on what your level of your income is and what's happening with you or your spouse. So, we look at percentages as a guideline, but, those are percentages that can make people very nervous, as you start to get closer to those. And then things change. If you bought that and you're at 30%, you have no children, all of a sudden you end up with twins, then one has a special needs, all of a sudden, and somebody now has to stay home from work, all of a sudden those numbers change. So, I say that because life changes and life happens. So if you're going to live live close to the edge, you're going to feel close to the edge. If you give yourself a little breathing room and you don't bite off more than you could chew, or you're not close to that edge, you're making a good sound decision. And then you can fill that house with everything other than little Tykes toys. And we all know plenty of people who had beautiful homes and there wasn't a stick of furniture in there to even sit on. So, and that happens. And I tell people all the time, and in my practice, if I had $1 for every Mercedes key that was dropped on my conference room table, I'd be a very wealthy woman. There are plenty of people who come to me with very fancy everything and appear very fancy, and their house is in foreclosure. So it's a matter of how it's managed, and life happens. People lose their jobs, they get sick, kids have issues, and you have to prepare for that. And if you're going to live on the edge, you're going to find yourself one day, because that's what life is about. And that's what my book is about. It's life and death. It all goes together. So there needs to be an ounce of being prepared. But you know what? Nobody's prepared, because they say, I have insurance. I'll just use a credit card. I'll take a loan. I'll borrow. I'll do this. I'll deal with it later. And there aren't too many people that are very proactive about managing not only their current budgets, but future budgets, and managing enough money in the bank. This is the world that we live in. It's very materialistic, and it's not a judgmental statement. I mean, I love those things just as much as the next person does, but there are lots of opportunities to buy and purchase and create, but there's also opportunities to buy and purchase for yourself and pay yourself. And it's what your mindset is. You did bring up a very good point I want to touch on, is that most people are not financially educated in terms of the terminology and the way to manage money. We weren't really taught it. Most of our generation's parents didn't really talk about it. It's still not talked about. It's not considered appropriate to talk to children really about your finances. And most people are not educated in terms of what does credit mean. Most people can't read a credit report. How do you know your score is good if you can't read the credit report? And is that really your score, or is that a FICO score? So, and what's the difference between the two? Most people, I would say.
What is the difference between the two? What is the difference?
So a regular credit score is not a FICO score is an experience score calculated by them. And a regular credit score would be a score that comes on average between the three. There's 3 different credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, each one will compile a score. And each one of them, they basically take the average, because not every creditor reports the same information to all 3 creditors. So that's why a FICO is one type of scoring model. That's the one that people talk about the most, because that's the one that's seen on their credit card statements, and that's the easy one to get. But the actual credit score can be different, can also differ from your mortgage score and your car buying score. So when you go to get a mortgage or a car lease or loan, those scoring models are slightly different and are not necessarily the same. So, and again, if I gave a credit report, not only can most people not pull their credit report, but they can't read the report. And that's understandable. Again, not a judgmental statement, but understandable, because who taught them to read it?
No, people can't read their tax returns. People don't understand their life insurance policies, their retirement plans,
How about their mortgages? I had somebody come to me the other day and say to me, I don't understand any of this. Well, but you signed it.
I just want the house. I want the big giant house. Now, when you're looking at this and you're providing, clients come to you in crisis, I would think, right? Is it, or
sometimes there's a crisis. So the crisis is a subjective term. So sometimes it's a crisis where, oh my God, I've been sued, or I have a judgment, or what am I going to do? And other times it's a point in time where they can no longer take the current status of the situation, which is just paying the bills and never getting anywhere. So I don't know that I would call it a crisis. I would call that maybe a call to action, where somebody wakes up and says, what am I doing? I need to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing here and who can help me get to a better place.
Right. And you're seeing a lot, like it's very popular now, a lot of the ads that you hear on radio and things like that, or you see on the internet, are these debt relief firms. We can get your debt knocked down. Like you have credit card debt, you have $80,000 of credit card debt. We can get that knocked down and, get rid of it. Is that real? Is that
No, that's not a realistic statement at all. In fact, any company or organization that makes you a promise for a specific dollar amount and exact timeframes, that's a huge red flag. So there are lots of companies out there, and I've been doing this a long, long time. And I was a in-house counsel to a national company 20 plus years ago. I can tell you that, consumers are in very vulnerable positions. They are fantastic salespeople. Most of the calls and information that comes to people is coming from a call center, not even from the direct company. And that call center is pre-screening you and then sending your information to multiple different companies who will then, try to close the deal. When you really want to resolve debt and you want it to be effective, you need somebody and an organization who knows you, who meets with you, knows you, works with you, and can say, hey, you know what, John? I know this is what's best for you, and this is how we're going to strategize to resolve your debt. Because everybody can have an American Express account and a Discover account, but how and what American Express and Discover and other creditors do to you will be different from what they do to other people. And no two accounts are really necessarily the same, even though we resolve debts on averages. I'm not saying that there aren't legitimate companies out there. There are some very good companies that are out there, but the consumer needs to be aware of what is that company going to do for you, and know whether that's a legitimate company. Many of them change names very often. Many of them have been up and down a host of different times. I mean, if you just Google it in certain states, you'll see that there's hundreds of them that are closed down. In New York, like some other states, you need to be licensed by the Department of Finance to do debt settlement, and there's very few companies that are licensed. And those licensing requirements require bonding, and they also require limitations on what can be charged. So if you're going to be charged upfront, or you're going to be charged monthly service fees, or your creditor is going to take or that company is going to take all the money upfront, those are red flags to be aware of. And as the consumer, you know what happens? I ask people why they go through those companies, because many of those failed cases come to me, and I say, so why did you choose this company? I didn't know what to do, and it was right there. And I spoke to the person, it just sounded like it was going to help. But that's not the reason to go with a debt settlement or a debt consolidation company, because it's in front of you. You must take time, and I would say this to trusted advisors when you're talking to clients and friends and family, because people will approach you about how to manage things. Think about it. Like I said to this one woman who knew me, I said, why did you go with that company and not call me? I was embarrassed. You know,
sure.
I'm not a debt.
You know, people, that whole book, I mean, your whole book's Life in Debt, right? And people are embarrassed by having debt. They're embarrassed by the financial circumstances that they've got themselves into. And, you know, to me, one of the most important parts of a financial plan is being very honest with where you are currently. In our planning process, we do what we call a wealth curve pressure identifier conversation. Is I really want to get to know where you are. I want to know where the income is. I want to know where the savings are. I want to know how the debt is structured. I want to know what the lifestyle is. Typically, what I find is that when there's credit card debt, the lifestyle is all messed up. So the budget tools that you mentioned are really important. But knowing the individual and knowing all of the present things really dictates, you know, I find it to be a freeing experience for a lot of people, because for the first time, they can really talk about it and realize that, you know, my plan's not optimal, and I now need to take action. Most people say I don't have a plan. Well, everybody has a plan. The question is, what plan are you following? Like, who gave you this plan? Like, you kind of fell into the plan. That's a plan, okay? Yeah. You know, in your book, you have a chapter, 6 common budgeting mistakes and how to fix them. And I think, you know, one of the things that popped out at me when I read this was that for years, my father and I, when we were building financial plans, the client would come in and they'd say, I need $8,000 a month for my retirement plan. And you kind of think, you know, early on, you'd be like, okay, we'll build a plan based on $8,000 per month. And you realize you put a plan in play, they're not really spending $8,000. They might be spending $10,000, $11,000, or $12,000 a month, right? Because they're missing the one-time annual expenses. Right. They don't have this preparing for the unexpected, as you mentioned, right? But like, you know, the water heater broke, and I now need to spend $1,000 that I wasn't thinking about. They don't have this, you know, people don't respect cash. Like, even, you know, having a certain amount of liquid money, cash in the bank, 6 months, I don't care, you know, 6 months equal to your annual income, I don't care what it's earning. That cash allows you not to get in debt, allows you to take advantage of opportunities. It allows you to be flush and to have what I like to call is shit happens. You know, stuff goes wrong, right? And nobody has that in your plan. And what I thought about is the 6 things, you know, not making friends with your budget. I thought that was awesome, because your budget is your friend, and you need to understand what your budget is, because people aren't doing it. Omitting time, you know, one-time annual expenses, not preparing for the unexpected, no savings account. I think that's crucial. And those small cash items, right? Oh my God. You know, you took $300. Yeah, like there's so much cash that goes through people's things that they don't have accounted for. And then the realistic goals. I think you finish it off with something that I thought was really powerful, because, you know, in financial planning, there's 2 things. There's goal-based planning and there's cash flow planning. Well, goal-based planning is kind of unrealistic to me from the standpoint of, I have a goal, that's great, but I can't really do the goal unless I have good cash flow. Right? Well,
you know, everybody does some sort of goal-based planning, because they're like, I want to go on vacation, or I want to do this, I want to do that. Those wants are somewhat like a goal. The problem is with the errors in budgeting. One, most people don't like math. So budgeting includes math. So there's an automatic turnoff to the whole process. They don't know really how to budget. And then the small everyday purchases, somebody said to me, well, the kids need clothes and stuff. I said, well, that has to be part of your budget. It's not like, and if you need more clothes in September because they go back to school, then you have to project for the September budget. You just do.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
if once, and projecting for the unexpected. I mean, I had emergency surgery this year, and I had to pay the deductibles on those, and that was thousands of dollars. I mean, that was completely unexpected. It's not like I put it in my budget that I'm going to have emergency surgery. So when you're old, when you start to get older, things come up like that. And if you're not prepared, you're just going to stick it on a credit card and end up paying it. And that's what happens with most people. The truth is, and the reality is, that most people just take out a credit card and put expenses on a credit card. But then they tell me they live without the credit card, but yet they have very little available credit on that credit card, but they can't live without it. So it's a cycle, and it's a thought process. And in order to interrupt the thought process and the cycle, it's getting to be aware of your financial situation. You can't have a goal if you're not aware of what's happening with yourself. What comes in, what goes out. I know that in June, my homeowner's insurance payment is due. I know that, there are people who pay their property taxes. Here we pay, it's in my personal mortgage, but you have the option of putting it in a mortgage or paying it outright. So it's paid twice a year, but you can't wait to the last minute to say, oh my God, how am I going to come up with the money for that? Or
you need to have that sinking fund available for that money, monthly budgeted into your cash flow.
100%. It needs to be put away every single month. You know that the kids go back to school in August and September, depending on where you live in this country. And so you know that you need school supplies. You know that you need, so budget to do school supplies. The school supplies cost you $200, which is a lot of money. Then you know what? You should be buying it maybe $50 a month starting in May, June, July, and August, so that you don't have to come up with $200 lump sum by the time August comes around. You have to help yourself and be aware. The problem is that life is so fast and so short and so much going on that it's very hard to do that. And then you wake up one day and you're saying, I got turned down for a loan, or I don't have any more credit cards, or I don't know what I'm going to do. So that's what ends up happening. And that's not just low income. Though I have clients that make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It's all about the zero, how much you're spending. If somebody may spend $200 on something and somebody else spends $2,000 or $20,000, it's all a matter of what's available to them. And the more money you have, the less you're watching it.
Yeah. I think, so if we're sitting here and we're, looking at that's your friend, get a plan. But if you've got problems, like what would the listeners of the podcast, what would the first thing that they would be doing? Their debt is to a point where they're getting uncomfortable, they're having trouble with monthly cash flow. What should they do?
First, you have to recognize the feeling that you're feeling uncomfortable. There's an awareness piece. You know what? Every month I just make my minimum payments. There's not much money left over after I pay my bills, or I don't see the balances going down. Those are all things that should spark awareness that, you know what? Something's not right here. So once you become aware of it, now you say, okay, so I'm aware of this and I see the problem. Can I work through this on my own? What if I rework my budget? Not, can I go out and take a debt consolidation loan or a home equity line of credit and fix this? What can you do on your own to increase cash flow and decrease expenses? Because the underlying issue is a lack of cash flow, and that's why you're using credit to supplement your life. If you can't fix that part of it, then you need to come talk to somebody like me, who's a financial attorney who understands the ramifications of not paying your bills and your credit implications. Not some random person, who says that I've done this, but I was a nutritionist before I did this, and now I'm, now I'm in finance. So you need to understand that there will be legal and tax implications to changes in your status of your debts. And that's why you need an expert to help you with it. It doesn't cost more. My phone consultations are free. Make the call and have a conversation and find out whether it makes sense. The problem is that most people say to me, I should have come to you 9 months or a year ago. I get that all the time, because by the time you realize you have a problem and you've gone through the process of trying to figure this out or get a loan or take more debt on, you've made it worse. And then they say, I should have come to you. But most people aren't ready for me when they first become aware that there's a problem. You know, it's the old adage, the moment you see that, you got to run and get help. You know, it's like the Woody Woodpecker. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but the Woody Woodpecker cartoon where he says, had Woody gone to the police, this would never have happened. It's the same thing. Had you gone to seek out help, the ramifications of waiting and making things worse wouldn't be there. But again, people need to go through a process, and it is a process. I understand the embarrassment. Somebody like myself is like a debt doctor. There's nothing you can tell me that I haven't seen, heard, or otherwise know about. So you won't shock me. You can't shock me. And I'm not going to be judgmental. I'm here to help.
So if people want to get a copy of your book, where do they go to get a copy of the book?
You can get it on Amazon or lifeanddebtbook.com. There's a link to it on my website at www.taynelaw.com, TAYNELAW.com. And certainly you can put me in any search engine, Leslie Tayne, and Life and Debt Book, and that will come up.
Okay. As we wrap up here, any last comments, any points that you want to make?
So I talk about a lot of this stuff, certainly on all my social media, from Twitter and Facebook, the Tayne Law Group on Facebook, and on, I write a lot about all of these topics. I'm sure that whatever somebody's issue is, I've written on it, and I'm available to speak to you about it. Don't be ashamed and embarrassed to get yourself some help, and be aware that you could help yourself. And just because something worked or didn't work for somebody else doesn't mean it doesn't work for you. Everybody has debt. Doesn't matter what car they drive or what they do. Everybody has debt.
And I think what's really the important point there is, the sooner you take action, the less of a problem it's going to be, and the better off you're going to be financially 5 years out, 10 years out.
It's like being sick. If you had a cold or a cough, and that cough was lingering and you're just hacking away, you've tried all the over-the-counter medicines and that doesn't work, and it's not getting better. Or maybe some days it's better than other days and it's manageable, or you forgot about it. Eventually that cough is going to continue on and get worse. And that's the same thing with debt. It's a cough, and it will never go away if you don't do something to fix it. You have to go to a doctor.
Yeah, that makes great sense. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot. I think everybody should get the book. I think we're in a position in life where, if you're listening to this, you want to pretty much everybody has debt, and getting control of your debt and making the debt as efficient as possible is the focus that we do in our financial planning practice. But I think there are strategies and things that can be done based upon your unique service, your unique circumstances. And I think addressing that sooner than later is really an important part of this process.
Totally. And then you have more money to invest. You want your money to grow for you and work for you. So that's the best way to look at it, that you want that money to work for you. You don't want to be paying bills all the time.
No, that's for sure. Okay, this was really good, and I really appreciate your time today. So again, if you want to reach out and get Leslie's book, go to lifeanddebt.com or go to the taynelawgroup.com. You can sign up for a consultation with you. You also have a pretty cool budget tool called Budget Jewel that's available out there too, right? That's yours?
And the book is available at lifeanddebtbook.com. But
lifeanddebtbook.com. Thank you.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, we have a budgeting tool that's very basic budgeting tool, and we can provide. There's lots of budgeting tools that are out there that are really basic, easy to use. And if you need help with budgeting, don't ask for it. Don't be afraid to ask for how do I budget. If you don't know how, it's okay. Let somebody show you how to do it.
Yeah, and we have tools to help also. So anybody listening, either contact Leslie or contact myself, and we'll go from there. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you.
Have a great day, Leslie. Thank you.
Welcome to the end of the video. Smallwood Wealth Management is an investment advisor representative. The opinions expressed by Smallwood Wealth Management and guests on this show are their own. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented for this educational purposes only. Moreover, no listener should assume that any discussions or information presented serves as a receipt of or substitute for personalized advice from Smallwood Wealth Management or from any other investment professional and is not intended as an offer of solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Smallwood Wealth Management is not a law firm or an accounting firm, and no portion of this presentation should be interpreted as legal, accounting, or tax advice. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as a recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Thank you for listening.